Welcome to Hochoka Podcast.
Look out, Gucci. You have competition. Kids with pain and trauma are costume designers. Hello, Mataki Yepi, and welcome to Hochoka here at the center of St. Joseph's Indian School's campus. I'm Scott Wooster, your Hochoka host. We're glad you've joined our circle for part 2 of a 3-part series called Kid Whispering Series 2. Today, Mark Fredo joins us again to unpack the wisdom in his book, The Art of Kid Whispering, Reaching the Inside Kid. Mark, welcome back to Hochoka.
Thank you, Scott.
So, in our last episode, we talked a lot about trauma and what that can mean. I was hoping you could help us understand a little bit more about trauma's impact on a child as they develop, or a child's development.
Surely. Trauma has various effects on various people. And when trauma happens early in life, it can certainly have long-lasting effects on their development in terms of every aspect of health, and the way they see themselves in the world around them. As a grandfather of little children, I sometimes stand back and watch what they're experiencing. What does their world look like, sound like, feel like? And recognizing that they're surrounded. They're surrounded by love, they're surrounded by attention, people who understand their needs, who try to meet their needs. And that's not to say that it's easy, because parenting is never easy. But really watching what they're experiencing and realizing that so many of the young people that I work with don't have that. See, my grandchildren have what John Cena would call family privilege. And there's an abundance of family who all love and care for them. So many times there are young people who don't get that. And it affects their ability to develop in many ways, and significantly emotionally. In our work, we sometimes refer to the work of Mary Margaret Wood. Dr. Wood is a developmental psychologist. She was a student of Erik Erikson, so back from another generation of significant people in the field. And she talks about emotional development and different levels of emotional development. And we can look at emotional development chronologically. We also have to look at it experientially. So early in life, sort of what she would refer to as the existential question that happens in children between 0 and 2 is the world a safe place? Again, it's a state experience, not a word experience. But, my grandchildren, as they get to be 2 years old and beyond, they're going to, is the world a safe place? Yeah, they're safe. They feel safe because there's people around all the time. There's people who love them and who meet their needs and, help them grow through the challenges of, becoming a 2-year-old. And of course, everybody knows there's lots of challenges becoming or being around a 2-year-old. So what happens if the answer to that question is no? What happens if kids don't have a state of safety because those needs weren't met? Either they were neglected or abused. If the world is not a safe place, at 2-year-olds whose brains are quite active in growing neural pathways, they're exploring, they're experiencing, they're sort of taking control because they're 2. They're going to run into a lot of different challenges, and their experiences may in fact be harsh. So if you haven't met that emotional level, you're sort of stuck, because the next level really has to do with what Dr. Wood called inadequacy. Can I measure up to my parents' expectations? So in this next stage of development, kids are 3 to 5 years old. They're beginning to acquire language-based memories. And so can I measure up to my parents' expectations? Well, if their parents are indifferent or harsh, they're getting messages about themselves, either through neglect or through sort of language or even physical experience. By the time kids complete this stage of development emotionally, they're in another realm of life. They're supposed to be school ready. 5-year-olds are supposed to be ready to go to kindergarten. In my work in other places where I do training and consulting, in recent years, I've seen more 5-year-olds, more kindergarten kids who are not school ready. And that's been sort of fascinating to me because good news, bad news. The sad part is they're 5 years old and they're really hurt kids and they're not having those needs met. The upside is they're only 5 years old and we know that.
Right.
And we have opportunities to begin to interact. So, beyond that, it's, can I live up to my own expectations? How much do kids incorporate the values that they're getting in those early years? How much do they incorporate that and make them their own? And again, depending on the pathway that they're taking developmentally, they're going to be sort of stuck with, good, bad, or ugly. And it's going to be very hard for them to mitigate the world around them. So if you have young people here who come from adversity and whose level of emotional development isn't where it could be in terms of the chronological development, which she will consider through adolescence basically, or what we had called adolescence. You may have somebody who says this kid acts like he or she is, and then they usually say a younger age.
Yeah.
And that's probably true, because what you're seeing, if you see patterns of really sort of younger, emotional, reactive behavior, you're probably right. It's probably a relatively accurate but informal assessment of emotional development. So what that means for people like us who do this kind of work is that we have to be able to understand that probably is a level of emotional development and help them. One of the things that Dr. Wood tells us is that you can't stage jump. In other words, because I'm 13 years old now, doesn't mean I'm going to be in this emotional development stage of conflict. Which is, I'm now with peers. I'm in middle school age, and I'm, dealing with peers. But if you're still stuck emotionally at, in abandonment or inadequacy, what we have to do, what the adults who are caring for these kids have to do, is realize that we have to try to meet those emotional needs. Give them experiences. We're not going to meet the needs. We're going to try to create experiences where they can experience those needs being met in positive ways. So in 0 to 2 is the world a safe place? Well, for kids here or in the schools that I work with or other residential programs I work, the world has expanded. So is it safe here? To be able to have those experiences where is it safe here? Do I have a sense of safety here? Then is the world a safe place? They might be starting to think it could be in some places. It could be safe. And then the next piece, once they get out of the realm of their parents or primary caregivers, extended family or whatever, can I live up to the expectations? Can I measure up to the expectations of the significant adults around me? We have to be able to provide that here. We have to be able to give kids feedback about what are expectations for successful, healthy living, in this place or in a school or, wherever they are, and understand that, it's important to be able to live up to the expectations, to measure up to the expectations of significant adults in this setting.
And I think what you're talking about is about reaching the inside kid too, and so often the behavior, it's a symptom of something. It's not necessarily the problem. And in the book, you use the word, the Lakota word, which is Ayeshka, and to explain the adult's role. So first of all, what does Ayeshka mean to you, and is that what the kid? How is that what the kid inside needs?
Well, in our work with this over the years, and I said this took some years for us to develop. JC and I, ask for input from, our teachers and mentors. And Martin Brokenleg has been very supportive of our work. And he responded to us at one point with that Ieshka word, and so we were sort of translating it as it means translator. And what Martin said was it actually more literally, more closely means to speak with clarity. And that's kind of, he was suggesting that's what we do in kid whispering, is we try to speak with clarity to the young person. More importantly, though, we try to speak with clarity about the young person. We try to, translate, if you will, speak clearly about the young person to other people who may not be able to see this young person in strength-based terms. Sometimes people have a very narrow perspective. We begin to be able to see kids in a broader way. We begin to see purposely look for strengths in kids. So while we can say, yes, this young person does this, they interrupt, they disrupt, they get into fights, that's all true. And we also know this is true. And that's the part where, Martin saw what we were doing was not diminishing or denying the concerns of others. Rather, we were understanding that people have those concerns for specific reasons, and there's more to this kid. There's more to this kid, and that's really what how that Lakota term and Martin's guidance inspired us to see kid whispering for ourselves in a clearer, broader way.
Right. And you're interpreting what that kid's behaviors mean and trying to sort out what that means for the kid. And I've always thought the word interpreter is the way I understand that, which I think is a great word. The Lakota spiritual man interprets what the spirits are telling him and then is able to give that to the people in a good way. And so you're trying to understand where the kid is coming from to give it to his, as you would say, ecology in order for that to feed back into that kid. It's good stuff. So we talked about Gucci, and you and I are a couple of fashionistas here for certainly, right?
Should be obvious to everybody.
Yeah, it should be. Yeah, everybody can see that. But a costume designer emerges when a child doesn't have the Yeshka or somebody to interpret those things for them. How can you explain that?
Yeah, costumes, Jay and I sort of keep it simple. We look at, costumes are either externalizing or internalizing.
Okay.
They happen for a reason. Now, sometimes kids will develop a costume more consciously than others. Sometimes it's just reactive, and it's really based on meeting needs the best way they can, without the context of guidance and support and teaching from others. So, a costume could be a kid who's really frightened, who presents as if he's not, who is willing to be aggressive or get into fights or, sort of prove his toughness because he doesn't want people to see how weak they are. Other costumes are actually accurate portrayals. We have kids many times who have been abused or neglected who feel badly about themselves, and they don't disguise it. What they do is magnify it. They make themselves more distasteful, more alienating from other adults, to just because it magnifies that sense that they have of not being worthy or those kind of things. So costumes, we have to be able to be mindful that what we're seeing, the present, and let me go back and say this, that I don't think costumes are a big mystery that happens around hurt or troubled kids. Everybody has their own way of presenting in different places in different ways. So it's part of our sort of a normal part of our humanity. For kids who are hurt, it tends to have a more significance. It tends to be, more related to pain. It tends to be more related to really unmet needs. And so what we really try to be mindful of is that, and again, it goes beyond looking beyond, to realize that this young person is presenting to us in this certain way, but we're also being mindful and attentive to the way it's being presented and the broader context. And so we can ask questions about it. We are never judgmental about it, because sometimes costumes are obvious. Sometimes costumes have to do with adornment and hair color and, clothes and, they're very obvious, right. Externalizing. And we don't presume that that's somebody who's hiding pain. In the context of our work, we work with kids who are in pain. We're not being judgmental. We're being interested and curious. And sort of really fascinated in a very genuine way sometimes. But to give kids a chance so that the costume isn't going to be the thing that gets in our way.
Yeah.
We're going to be accepting of it, we're going to be interested and curious about it, and then we're going to move past it and talk about experiences. And so that doesn't become an obstacle to communication. So we try to do that, whether it's an externalizing costume or an internalizing costume, where they sort of turn the negative light on themselves as much as possible. So we recognize that beyond the costume might lie the inside kid. I met a young person, and his name is Sacco, and I can tell you that because he and I wrote an article together about this experience. But I was in Lowell, Massachusetts at an alternative school, and I was teaching, and the director said, there's a kid named Sacco who hasn't been coming to school. He was a star, and we haven't seen him for a while. So she did, this is really about the power of relationships. She literally put word on the street. She told kids, see him, tell him to come in on this Friday when I was going to be back there. And she said to him, you can either go in my office and have privacy, or you can stay in here and we'll just kind of listen in a little bit, or you could sit right here and we'll listen to your conversation because this is what this guy's here to teach us. And he said, I'll do whatever you want, because he, trusted Miss Karen. And so we sat in the middle of this room, and we realized we both had the same experience. Within just a few minutes, the other 13 people who were sitting in the room just disappeared. We had no sense that they were there, because we really got into a conversation, which I always appreciate and marvel at. I never really take it for granted.
Right.
But I think it's just really cool.
It's a gift, yeah.
Yeah, that it happens. And so he was a gang kid. He was involved in a gang. He was a shot caller in a gang. He enrolled himself in this alternative school for really good reasons. He didn't want to keep living like that. He didn't want to die like that. He didn't want his little brother to have to go through the kind of things he had to go through, and he didn't want to see his mama cry anymore. Now, there's a long story here. I'm just going to give you the very short version. In this conversation, I was asking him what got in the way, because he hadn't been coming to school. What got in the way of those really important goals that he had, and he could really articulate very clearly and with conviction? What got in the way? And he put his head down, and there was some silence. Silence always seems longer than it is. And he looked up at me with a different countenance, a different expression on his face, and he said in a quiet voice, I've done some really terrible things. And I realized, combined with the goals that he had for enrolling himself in this alternative school and being a star in the words of the staff, and then this absence because he had to be on the street dealing with various things. So I asked, what is important, so important that it gets in the way? And he said, I've done some really terrible things, with a different tone and a different expression. And so I asked him, without compromising him or me, if he can give me some idea of what those things are, because they're getting in the way of something that is really important to him. And so he explained, some things about safety and, revenge and various, gang-related things. And what I realized in this conversation, that's what he was doing. That was his costume. He was a significant member of a serious gang in that part of Massachusetts, and he was engaged in that. But that's not who he wanted to be. See, that was the first time I experienced what we call the inside kid. I realized there's another kid in there, the one that enrolled himself in the school, the one that had these significant goals for himself, but also was drawn back into other pressures in his life. And so, both, the costuming and the inside kid really showed up at that point, and that's how we incorporated this into our work, because it was the first significant example that I recognized that we can put in the context of kid whispering. of a young person who was doing that. So it was an externalizing costume, and yet when he looked back up, in the what he said and the way he said it, said there is so much more to this kid that really needs to be understood.
Right.
So I'll jump forward a number of years. One of the things he told me was he wanted to work with kids. He wanted to help kids stay off the street, et cetera. And he told me this when he was 17 years old. Well, some ensuing things occurred, and 4 years later, he ends up at the Boys and Girls Club in that place where he grew up, and a guy who used to be a worker there was now the director and gave him a job. Now, because he had, a record, and, he had engaged in, felony activities, what's the chances he's going to go get work in a place that works with kids?
Right, yeah.
But this director made his own decision, and he ended up doing this for many years. He worked not just with the Boys and Girls Club, with an organization called the United Teen Equality Center, and he did exactly what he said he was going to do when he was 17 years old. That had a lot of power for me, that experience of watching him. He gives credit to Miss Karen, he gives credit to me. The truth of the matter is we provided some guidance and support along the way, but this is the power of the inside kid. He had a sense of who he wanted to become. And so he's married, he has daughters, and in fact now I don't think he's working with kids anymore, but now he has a fishing charter up in Massachusetts. So if you're ever up there and interested in fishing, I know a guy.
Yeah, okay, you could take me out,
Yeah.
Okay. So we'd like to thank Mark Fredo for talking with us today. In our final conversation with Mark in this series, we'll help you develop some superpower skills to meet the inside kid and to support the youth in your lives. As for our audience, thank you for joining us here in the Hochoka at the center of St. Joseph's Indian School's campus, where we talk about issues that are central to Native American education today. Until we see you next time, stay centered.